20 minutes earlier, Brooke had called my wife an embarrassment in front of both families. She had no idea she was about to thank her for saving her own brother's life. The private dining room glowed soft and gold, candlelight catching the edges of wine glasses nobody had touched in several minutes. Philip Ashcombe stood at the head of the table, glass raised, his voice already thick with something he hadn't planned on feeling this early in the evening. 8 years ago, he said, a stranger gave our son a second chance none of us will ever be able to repay. Diane sat very still beside me, her spine straight the way it always got when she was working hard to stay composed. Her hand drifted, almost without her noticing it herself, to her side, just above her hip, resting there the way you rest a hand over an old ache you've long since stopped mentioning out loud. The sleeve of her dress had ridden up slightly from the earlier photographs, just enough that the faint edge of a scar showed beneath the fabric, pale and thin, the kind of detail nobody at that table would have thought twice about. I glanced at her. She didn't glance back. Philip kept talking, warm and unguarded, about gratitude, about a debt his family had carried for 8 years with no name to attach it to. I looked around that room, at Brooke, at Karen, at Tyler's empty chair still waiting to be filled, and I don't think anyone in that room understood yet how small the world was about to become. 2 hours earlier, none of that toast existed yet, and neither did the version of the evening I thought we were walking into. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 61 years old, a retired postal supervisor from just outside Richmond, married to my wife Diane for 32 years. Diane spent nearly 3 decades as an ICU nurse before retiring earlier than either of us had planned, a decision she made quietly, the way she made most of her biggest choices, without much explanation beyond what she thought I needed to hear. We live in the same modest house we bought the year Andrew was born, the kind of place with a leaky gutter I keep meaning to fix, and a kitchen that still smells like Diane's cooking more than any renovation. Andrew is 29 now, engaged to Brooke Ashcombe, whose family runs a successful commercial real estate firm 2 counties over, the kind of family accustomed to catered parties and professional photographers, a world Diane and I had learned to navigate carefully, politely, without ever quite belonging to it. Every October, for exactly 1 evening, Diane pulls open her nightstand drawer and takes out a small folded letter, 8 years old now, the creases soft from handling. She reads it alone, usually after I've gone to bed, and when I've asked about it over the years, her answer has always been the same, gentle but final. It's personal, Robert. I stopped pressing a long time ago, the way you learn to stop pressing on the 1 or 2 rooms in a marriage that belong entirely to the other person. I knew, in the broadest possible terms, that Diane had donated a kidney anonymously through the National Kidney Registry 8 years earlier, in the last stretch before she left nursing. She'd made the decision quietly, filled out the paperwork on her own initiative, recovered without ever telling most of her own family, let alone announcing it to mine. When I asked her once why she'd never told anyone, she'd shrugged in that plain way of hers and said, "It wasn't for anyone to know. It was just something I could do." Diane has never needed much to feel like herself. A working kitchen, a full garden, a quiet Sunday, and I loved that about her more than I ever managed to say out loud. The evening of Andrew and Brooke's engagement dinner, I stood in our bedroom doorway watching Diane decide what to wear. 3 dresses laid out across the bed like small quiet arguments. She picked the pale blue one, short-sleeved, simple, the kind of dress she'd worn to a dozen ordinary dinners before this one. She hesitated over it a moment longer than usual, her fingers resting on the fabric near the sleeve, before she put it on anyway. I noticed the small hesitation. I didn't ask her about it. Some things in a long marriage you learn, arrive in their own time, whether you go looking for them or not. Brooke Ashcombe was 27 years old. polished in the particular way that comes from growing up in a family where appearances mattered as much as anything spoken aloud. She wasn't unkind by nature, not exactly. She'd simply never had much reason to notice the difference between image and substance, having grown up with both handed to her at once. Her parents, Philip and Karen, arrived warm and easy, the kind of people who hugged you a beat longer than necessary the first time they met you. Karen especially took to Diane immediately, asking real questions about her nursing career, about the peach preserves Diane had brought as a small gift, listening with the kind of genuine attention that made Diane visibly relax for the first time all evening. It was Karen, without ever meaning to, who first modeled what respect toward my wife could look like in that room, a contrast I wouldn't fully appreciate until much later that night. Brooke's attention moved differently. She'd hired a professional photographer for the evening, an elegant young woman fussing quietly with lighting near the private room's entrance, and Brooke kept glancing over at the arrangement of guests with the particular anxious precision of someone imagining how the photographs would look before they'd even been taken. When she noticed Diane's dress, she leaned toward Andrew and murmured, just loud enough for me to catch it from 2 feet away, that she wished his mother had asked what the dress code was for tonight. Andrew, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He didn't say anything back to her, not yet. Near the doorway, Brooke checked her phone with visible irritation. "Tyler's running late again," she said to no one in particular, rolling her eyes. "He's always late for everything since the surgery, like the world just owes him extra time now." Nobody asked her what surgery she meant. I filed the comment away without thinking much of it, the way you file away 100 small remarks at any family gathering that don't seem to matter yet. The photographer clapped her hands together gently, drawing everyone's attention toward the far wall. "If we could get both families together for a formal portrait before dinner," she said, smiling, already adjusting her camera strap, "that would be wonderful." Everyone began shifting into place, and I watched Diane straighten instinctively, the same practiced composure she wore into every room that asked more of her than it gave back. The photographer arranged everyone with brisk, cheerful efficiency, moving people a few inches this way, a few inches that way, chasing some ideal symmetry only she could see. When she reached Diane, she paused, considering the frame, and Brooke stepped in before anyone else could. "Maybe you could stand at the end there, Diane," Brooke said, gesturing vaguely toward the far edge of the group, her eyes flicking briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward Diane's sleeve. "Just so the shot balances out a little better." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Diane, unbothered or simply practiced at not showing otherwise, stepped where she was directed without a word. The second moment came a few minutes later, during the milling, unstructured time before everyone sat down to eat. Diane reached across the table to help arrange a centerpiece that had tipped slightly, and as she leaned forward, her sleeve rode up just enough to reveal the pale edge of the scar along her side. Brooke, standing nearby with one of her bridesmaids, visibly recoiled. A small, involuntary flinch she didn't bother to hide. I heard her murmur, not quite as quietly as she probably intended, "God, could she have worn something else?" The bridesmaid laughed softly, uncomfortably, glancing around to see who else had heard. I had. Diane had too, I was almost certain, though her face didn't change at all, the same composed pleasantness settling back into place like nothing had happened. Andrew, catching the tail end of it, pulled Brooke gently aside near the drink table, his voice low but firm enough that I caught most of it anyway. "That wasn't okay," he said. "That's my mom." Brooke's composure cracked, just slightly, defensive rather than apologetic. "I'm just saying," she said, loud enough now that half the room could hear her clearly. "It's an engagement party. Not exactly the moment for her to be an embarrassment in photos, with my whole extended family here." The room went quiet in that particular way a room does when everyone has heard something they wish they hadn't. Karen's face went stricken, her eyes darting toward Diane with an apology she didn't yet have words for. Philip cleared his throat awkwardly. Even Tyler's empty chair seemed to sit there more conspicuously than before. Diane didn't respond. She simply reached up, unhurried, and pulled her sleeve back down over the scar, the same small private gesture she must have made 1,000 times over the years, without anyone in the room ever noticing or asking why. She smiled, the same polite, practiced smile she'd worn into that room 2 hours earlier, and said nothing at all. I'd spent enough years married to a woman who worked ICU shifts to understand something most people never learned firsthand. The people most uncomfortable with a scar are almost never the ones who understand what it actually cost to earn it. I reached under the table and found Diane's hand, and she squeezed mine back once, briefly, before letting go. The silence stretched a beat too long before Philip, visibly uncomfortable with the tension now settling over both families, rose from his seat, glass in hand, clearing his throat with the forced brightness of a man trying to steer an evening back onto solid ground. "Well," he said, a little too heartily, "why don't we start things off on a better note? I'd like to say a few words before dinner." Karen glanced at him gratefully. Brooke sat back down, arms crossed, still faintly flushed. Diane folded her hands in her lap and looked up at Philip with the same calm, unreadable patience she'd carried through the entire evening so far. None of us yet understood what those few words were about to become. Philip raised his glass, glancing around the table with the easy warmth of a man accustomed to smoothing over rough patches with a well-timed toast. "To both families," he began, "and to everything ahead of Andrew and Brooke." Polite applause, a few raised glasses, the tension in the room easing just slightly. Then his voice shifted, softer, more private, the practiced cheer falling away into something raw. "There's something else I want to say tonight," he continued, "something that doesn't get said enough." He paused, looking down at his glass a moment before looking back up. 8 years ago this month, our son Tyler received a kidney transplant that saved his life. He was 22, and without it, the doctors told us plainly, he wouldn't have made it another year. Karen reached for his hand across the table, her eyes already glistening. "The donor came through the National Kidney Registry," Philip went on. "A complete stranger, someone we never got the chance to properly thank, because she chose, for reasons we've always respected even if we never understood them, to stay anonymous." He lifted his glass higher. "So tonight, before anything else, I want to raise a toast to a stranger we'll never get to meet, who gave us more time with our son than we ever thought we'd have." The room fell into a hush different from the uncomfortable one only minutes earlier. Something gentler, more solemn settling over the table instead. Beside me, Diane's hand tightened around her napkin, her knuckles paling slightly, her breath going carefully even in the way I recognized from 30 years of watching her steady herself through difficult moments at work. I glanced at her, and something in her face had shifted, subtle but unmistakable, a stillness that went deeper than composure now. Before I could lean over and ask her anything, the private room's door opened, and Tyler walked in, jacket slightly rumpled, apologizing already for the traffic on I-64, exactly as late as Brooke had predicted he'd be. Diane looked up at him for the first time that evening and went very still. Dinner moved forward the way dinners do after a toast like that, gently, everyone a little more tender with each other than they'd been an hour earlier. Tyler settled into the empty seat beside Karen, apologizing again for his lateness, and the conversation naturally drifted toward him, toward his recovery, toward the years since the transplant that he clearly didn't take for granted. "We tried for years to reach her," Karen said at one point, dabbing gently at her eyes. The transplant center said they'd forward a letter if she ever wanted contact, but we never heard anything back. We understood. We just always hoped she knew how much it mattered. Diane said very little through all of this, her fork moving slowly across her plate, her eyes fixed somewhere just past the centerpiece. I noticed her hand return, twice, to that same spot at her side, the same unconscious gesture from the cold open of the evening, and something in me, some old instinct from 32 years of marriage, understood before I let myself fully think it. I leaned toward her quietly. "Diane," I said, just for her, "is this—" She didn't answer directly. She simply gave me the smallest nod, almost nothing at all, but enough. "I need something from your purse," I said gently. She hesitated only a moment before nodding again, and I excused myself, retrieving her purse from beside her chair, and inside it, tucked into a side pocket I recognized instantly, the same folded letter she kept in her nightstand drawer every October, brought here tonight, it seemed, without either of us fully admitting why. I unfolded it carefully at the edge of the table, out of sight from the others, and read the first line to myself. "To the person who gave our son back to us, we hope one day we can thank you properly." I looked up at Karen, still speaking softly to Tyler about the years of uncertainty, and I understood, with a kind of quiet vertigo, that the words in my hand were not the letter Diane had written. They were the letter she had received. I sat back down slowly, the folded page still in my hand, and looked at my wife, giving her the choice with nothing more than my eyes. Diane looked back at me for a long moment, then, almost imperceptibly, nodded once more. I stood. "Philip," I said quietly, "would you mind if I added something to your toast?" Eli kept going, steady now, his voice carrying easily across a yard that had gone completely silent around him. "Every morning before an early shift, my dad drove me to school so I wouldn't have to take 2 buses. He never missed a single game or recital, not one, even when it meant leaving work without pay to do it. He's been splitting my tutoring bill down the middle with my mom for 2 years, and he never once brought it up at a single dinner table. Not to make himself look good, not even to make sure anyone knew." He paused, letting that settle over the guests, over his grandparents, over Brad's business associates standing near the fence with drinks slowly forgotten in their hands. Then he turned, gently but directly, toward Brad, who still hadn't moved, his champagne flute frozen somewhere between his chest and the toast he'd never gotten to finish. "You've done a lot for us the last 3 years, and I'm grateful for that," Eli said, his voice steady, carrying no anger in it at all, only a kind of clarity that felt more devastating than anger could have been. "But you didn't raise me alone, and I'm not going to let tonight be the night everyone forgets that." Nobody spoke. Somewhere near the drink table, I heard the small clink of ice settling in an abandoned glass. Eli turned back toward the yard, lifted the guitar into position against his chest, and began to play. 2 verses of a song I recognized from 100 Saturday mornings in the car, his fingers finding the frets with the same easy confidence he'd had since he was small. The crowd stood transfixed, some smiling through visible tears, Julie's mother pressing a napkin briefly to the corner of her eye. When he finished, he set the guitar down carefully on his chair, walked the length of the patio without hesitation, and wrapped both arms around me in front of everyone. I held on to my son the way I'd wanted to for longer than I could easily admit, my throat too tight to say anything at all, my hand finding the back of his head the way it had when he was small enough to carry. The applause that followed built slowly, then swelled, warm and unmistakable, moving through the yard like something finally being allowed to breathe. It wasn't the applause Brad had been standing there expecting to receive. It wasn't for him at all. He stood alone near the head of the table, glass still raised halfway, his mouth open around the beginning of a sentence he never finished. Slowly, without a word, he lowered the champagne flute and set it down on the table beside him. The energy of the party had already moved past him, warm and certain, settling instead around a boy and his father standing together in the middle of everyone. Tyler didn't let go of Diane's hand for a long time. When he finally found his voice again, it came out rough, unsteady in a way I imagine he wasn't used to in front of his own family. "You gave me my whole adult life," he said, "and I didn't even know your name until right now." Diane pressed her free hand gently over his. "You didn't need to know my name for it to matter," she said. "You just needed the years." Karen stayed close beside them, still wiping at her eyes, occasionally reaching out to touch Diane's arm, as though she needed to keep confirming she was really there. Philip stood at the head of the table, glass forgotten in his hand, watching the whole scene with the stunned, grateful expression of a man whose entire understanding of the evening had just been rewritten in front of him. Brooke slipped quietly out of the room a few minutes later. I noticed, but I didn't follow. It was Diane, eventually, who excused herself gently from Tyler and Karen and found her way toward the coat room, where Brooke stood alone, arms wrapped around herself, her earlier composure entirely gone. "I didn't know," Brooke said the moment she saw Diane, her voice trembling, no performance left in it at all. "That doesn't make what I said okay. I know that." Diane didn't rush to comfort her, and she didn't punish her with silence either. "You didn't know what the scar meant," she said simply. "Now you do. What matters is what you do with that." Brooke nodded, unable to speak further, tears slipping down her face without any attempt to stop them. Across the room, I watched Andrew watching his mother, an expression on his face I'd never quite seen directed at her before. Something between awe and a quiet, aching grief for every year she'd carried this without ever once mentioning it to anyone outside the two of us. Later, as the evening wound down, Karen approached Diane one more time, her eyes still damp, her voice hesitant in a way that suggested she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. "Would you let us properly celebrate you?" she said softly. "At Tyler and Brooke's wedding? Whenever that ends up happening now?" Diane glanced at me, then back at Karen, and I watched her consider the question seriously, the same careful weighing she brought to every decision that had ever mattered to her. She didn't answer right away. The months that followed brought changes I don't think anyone at that dinner could have predicted, least of all Brooke herself. She came to see Diane on her own twice that first month, without Andrew, without an audience. The first time simply to apologize properly, sitting at our kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she barely touched. The second time, she came with real questions, about the surgery, about recovery, about what it actually costs a person to give something like that away and never expect anything back. Diane answered everything patiently, the same way she must have once explained procedures to frightened ICU families for 30 years. By the third month, Brooke had started showing up beside Diane at a local kidney donation awareness table the hospital ran twice a year at community health fairs, the exact kind of public, unglamorous visibility she once would have gone out of her way to avoid being seen near. She wore the volunteer badge without complaint, handed out pamphlets, answered questions from strangers with a seriousness that surprised even Andrew. There's a photograph from one of those health fairs that Diane keeps on the refrigerator now. Her and Brooke standing side by side, both wearing matching Donate Life pins, both smiling in a way that has nothing performative left in it at all. Tyler and Brooke's wedding came the following spring, warm and unfussy, held in a garden behind the same restaurant where all of this had first come apart and come back together in the same evening. Before the ceremony began, Tyler found Diane near the entrance, holding the small ceremonial boutonniere meant for the groom. "Would you do the honors?" he asked her. Not his own grandmother, not Karen, but Diane, his voice steady with a certainty that needed no further explanation. Diane pinned it to his lapel with careful, practiced hands, her sleeve pushed up without a second thought. The old scar simply part of her now. Nothing left to hide, nothing left that needed hiding. People sometimes ask me if I was angry that night, watching someone humiliate my wife over something she'd never asked for credit for in the first place. I was, for about 20 minutes. Then, I watched an entire room learn what she'd actually been carrying, quietly, for 8 years, and the anger didn't seem worth holding on to anymore. Some people spend their lives trying to look important. Others spend theirs quietly being the reason someone else's life is still happening at all. I think about that scar differently now, the same one Diane used to tuck under her sleeve without a second thought. These days, she doesn't bother hiding it at all, and honestly, neither would I, if it were mine. If this story reminded you of someone whose quiet sacrifice went unrecognized until it mattered most, I'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments, like this video if it meant something to you, and subscribe for more stories about family, quiet grace, and the truths that surface exactly when they're needed.